A lot of people are learning Chinese right now, and almost everyone says the same thing. Chinese is impossible. But here is the honest part that I would like to share in my video. I am Chinese. It's my native language. I started using it when I was 5, and now in my early 30s, I still want to say this out loud. Chinese is hard, even for me. Not because we are all bad at languages, but because Chinese is built differently. Today, I will share what I have seen, what I have lived, and why Chinese feels so difficult, especially if you learned languages like French or English first. And if I miss anything, please add it in the comments. Before we talk about what's special about Chinese, let's talk about what's universal. Every human learns their first language the same way. You understand first, and then you speak. Long before you can write anything, you can already communicate. Linguists sometimes call this comprehensible input.
Probably the best kept secret in the profession. We acquire language in one way and only one way. When we understand messages. We call this comprehensible input. We acquire language when we understand what people tell us. Not how they say it, but what they say, or when we understand what we read.
And that applies to every language. But in this video, I want to mention that, well, Chinese starts to feel unfair. In French, if you hear a word, you can usually spell it if you know the rules. That's why French students do dictation practice, because you are training a sound to writing system. However, in Chinese, we also do dictation in school. The teacher says a word and we write it down. But what we are training is not how it sounds equals how it's written. What we are training is memory, visual memory. I want to put it in a dramatic way because it shows the difference clearly. Imagine someone speaks both English and Chinese. He has an accident. Unfortunately, he loses memory. And when he wakes up, he can still speak English, but his Chinese is gone. This is what I have watched from a documentary. Even it's not a scientific claim for everyone, it's an illustration of how Chinese can be stored differently in the brain. Because Chinese characters are not just letters that represent sounds, they are symbols. And when you write Chinese, your brain often records a shape, a structure, sound strokes, one line, one curve, one angle. In dictation, we don't retrieve sound to spelling. What we retrieve is sound, mental image, and Chinese character. That's why Chinese can feel like learning thousands of tiny patterns, not the words. I had a moment in Paris that made this click for me. I was at the Guimet Museum. I saw some old Chinese characters. It's very ancient, from a distant dynasty. I could read them. And an English native speaker nearby asked me. He was shocked. He asked me, how can you still understand something written so long ago? At first, I didn't even know how to answer because to me, it felt normal. It's so natural. But later, I went home and I thought about it. And I realized something beautiful. A symbol culture lasts longer than a sound culture. China is huge. Historically, one mountain can separate accents so much that people cannot understand each other. Pronunciation changes over centuries. Dialects change, and tones change, but the character stays. Even if the sound shifts through time, the meaning attached to the symbol stays surprisingly stable. That's why Chinese writing has this strange power. It can survive geography, dialects, and time. This also explains something many people don't realize. Chinese kids spend a massive part of childhood doing like handwriting drills, memorizing characters, dictation, reciting classical poetry. We are not just learning vocabulary, we are training a system. which means we train our eyes and our memory, and also the symbols, recognize the symbols. And even if people don't consciously notice it, this kind of language shapes how we think. There is a famous idea in Chinese culture, which is 眼见为实，耳听为虚. Seeing is truth, hearing is uncertain. That sounds philosophical, but it connects to language. A written character is stable. A sound can change meaning with tone, accent, context. So we value what is visible, what is concrete, what can be proven. This even shows up in relationships. If your partner is Chinese, you might notice they may not say, I love you as often. It's not that they don't feel it. It's that emotionally, words can feel light. Action feels real. You will also say it at work. Chinese employees may do a lot, but self-promotion is often less natural because deep down, the logic is we let action speak, not our language. Of course, individuals differ. I'm talking about here is a general pattern, how language and culture reinforce each other. Now here is another perspective. Because Chinese is so visual and symbolic, Chinese communication can naturally become artistic. In Chinese aesthetics, we love blank space, leaving things unsaid, and letting the listener feel the meaning. Think of traditional Chinese painting. The empty space is part of the art. That habit can carry into speech. Chinese has plenty of precise vocabulary. It's very rich. But in real conversation, many people prefer abstraction, suggestion, atmosphere. It's not always about saying everything clearly. Sometimes it's about letting meaning exist between the lines. I'm going to talk about something super practical. Why do Chinese shows often have subtitles? Even in YouTube videos, you saw some subtitles, even for native speakers. One reason is obvious. Many Chinese characters share the same pronunciation, same sound, different meaning. But here's another reason I have noticed. Chinese education makes us extremely strong at reading symbols. So subtitles don't feel annoying. We already process them fast. And because we rely so much on eyes, we sometimes undertrain the ear. That's why many Chinese people learning French feel struggling, not only with grammar, but with the shock of suddenly needing a stronger listening system. And if you look at the classic 4 skills, listening, speaking, reading, writing, Chinese learners often excel at reading first because we grew up training our eyes. Chinese also has a famous challenge, which is one word with many meanings. Of course, other languages have this too, yes, but Chinese can push it further. For example, in English, you have a problem and question. However, in Chinese, both can be just 问题, and that reveals a mindset. Whether it's a question or a problem, it's something blocking you, something to solve. This mindset also shows up in daily life. For example, cooking. In China, people might say, heat the oil until it's 90% hot. There is no exact temperature. It's based on experience. That reflects a strong culture which is master and apprentice. It's a culture which called atelier, where knowledge is passed through doing, watching, and repeating. It's the master taught the apprentice. And here is a small example that I love. In spoken Chinese, we say 他 for he, she, it. When you hear 他, you don't know which one it is. You only know by saying the person or saying the object or understanding the context. Again, it reveals that sound doesn't carry the full identity. The visual and the context do. It's a small detail, but it reveals the same pattern. Chinese is not built primarily to be decoded by sound. It's built to be held by symbols and meaning. If you understand Chinese as visual symbol language, your learning strategy changes. In French dictation, we train hear it and spell it. In Chinese, we should train say it, recognize structure, and then connect the meaning. Even if you don't know the pronunciation yet, characters can still carry meaning. For example, 山 means mountain, 川 means river, 日 means sun, then means person. This is the charm of Chinese. It doesn't fully depend on sound. It's a language that survived thousands of years because its core is symbolic meaning. Yes, characters evolved. Traditional and simplified characters exist, but the inner engine stayed. When the core stays stable, changes on the surface are like four seasons. So that's my view. Chinese is hard, not because you are weak, but because it's operating on a different system. If you are learning Chinese, you can add in a comment that what's the hardest part for you? Is the tones, characters, or reading between the lines? And if you are a native Chinese speaker, do you agree that we rely more on eyes than ears? Or do you see it differently? I'd love to read your experience in the comments.